Welcome to the REMODUS Diachronic Sociolinguistics video lecture series. I am Sampsa Holopainen, and I'm the teacher of this course. These videos are based on the Diachronic Sociolinguistics online course that was organized last year by the REMODUS Consortium, which is a network of universities that have Finno-Ugric departments of Finno-Ugric studies, and this was one of the online courses organized by REMODUS, and these short videos are based on those lectures. And this first video lecture is an introductory lecture. We are going to have a brief overview of some methodological issues on diachronic sociolinguistics, and also we will have a brief overview on the Uralic language family and its history, because this video course is mainly concerned with issues related to the Uralic languages, but I hope that these videos will be interesting for people working with other language families and other languages as well. So here we will investigate certain problems of prehistoric sociolinguistics and discuss some basic methodological issues in the light of case studies, mostly case studies involving mostly Uralic languages, as I said, but also other languages of Northern Eurasia. And this diachronic sociolinguistics is heavily related to the issue of language contact, and these lectures will actually be quite heavily oriented towards issues of language contact, but we will also discuss some other relevant issues like the sociolinguistic settings of proto-languages and what can we know about the sociolinguistic conditions where the reconstructed proto-languages were spoken. So Uralic linguistics, as some of you certainly know, it's a very long history of research on prehistoric language contact. So, for example, contact between Finnic and Germanic languages, contact between Turkic and Hungarian. They have an impressive and long history of research, and we will go into these topics in more detail later in other videos of this series. And there is also, during the recent decades, there has been much research on contacts between related languages and also on substrate, and these are also issues that we will discuss during this course. And as I mentioned, we will also discuss case studies involving reconstruction of proto-languages. So Uralic, which these days means the same as Finno-Ugric, is a language family in Northern Eurasia. The Uralic languages descend from the reconstructed ancestors of Proto-Uralic, which was probably spoken roughly 2,000 years, or the divergence of Proto-Uralic happened roughly 2,000 years before the beginning of our time. And it has 9 clearly defined branches. The exact number of languages is more difficult issue because, as many of you know, there is no clear-cut division between dialect and language, but there are 9 clearly defined branches, and then there are different kind of ideas on the genealogical connections between these branches. This is a traditional family tree with the Ugric branch highlighted here. So then this is just one way to display the relations of the Uralic languages. So they are clearly all genealogically related, but the exact relationship, the exact genealogical relationship is not completely clear. And here is a map where you can see the present distribution, or the distribution of Uralic languages that it used to be until very recently. So in Northern Eurasia and Hungarian in Central Europe as a geographic outlier. And as I already mentioned, there is a long history of contacts, and there has been contact with various Indo-European languages, Indo-Iranian, Baltic, Slavic, Germanic, possibly other Indo-European branches as well. Then there have been contact with Turkic languages. Most of the Uralic languages have had some kind of have been to some extent influenced by Turkic languages. And yes, then to the methodology. So some issues that we will discuss during this course are the idea of contact-induced change, how that can be proven that some change is really caused by contact. We will discuss issues related to language shift, different types of borrowing situations involving the substrate situations, and then discuss also the issues related to this issue of matter borrowing versus pattern borrowing. And this is something that we will come back later, but just a small teaser that this definition of substrate is something that we will discuss later on in more detail. And then this borrowing, this is something that is very central for our course. So if we think about historical sociolinguistics or prehistoric language contact and try to figure out the sociolinguistic settings where these contacts have taken place, borrowing is obviously something where language contact manifests itself quite clearly. But there are interesting discussions on possible constraints on borrowing in the very influential book by Thomasson and Kaufman. There will actually be a bibliography slide in the end where you can find all these references. And it has been noted by several researchers that when the contact situation is intense enough, almost anything can be borrowed, which from the point of view of sociolinguistics is quite an interesting issue. But nevertheless, it's often assumed, when we look at prehistoric borrowings, it's often assumed that the borrowed vocabulary tells something about the nature of the contact. So there is this old idea, this Wörter und Sachen, that we borrow words if we need them. But also other kinds of items can be borrowed. So there is this idea of prestige borrowing or luxury loans. So in some kind of contact situations, also words that you would think people wouldn't need, like words for body parts or kinship terms, they can be borrowed. And there is this whole issue of basic vocabulary. There is no really good definition of what counts as basic vocabulary, but there is this idea, this recurring idea in literature, that if the contact situation is intense enough, then also basic vocabulary can be borrowed, but the problems with determining what counts as basic vocabulary, that's obviously an issue here. Another issue is the level of bilingualism in borrowing situations, and this is something that we will also discuss later, but that's something that you can already think about, that what level of bilingualism is required in order to have a borrowing situation. And as I already mentioned, this definition of substrate is something that we will come back to, and this is actually something where Uralic studies have had much to contribute, and this is very relevant for large-scale models of prehistoric language contact. Substrate we will discuss in detail later, but there is also this idea of adstrate. So substrate it's usually assumed that there is this one language that becomes lost and that influences the newcomer language, but adstratum, that is something where it's assumed that the contact languages have more or less similar prestige, and it's kind of it's an interesting question that how can we define prehistoric adstrate and show that something is actually, some borrowings are adstrate borrowings, and there are now some well-known examples of Alanic loanwords, so loanwords from the prehistoric Iranian variety Alanic in Hungarian, something that these are well-known examples from earlier literature, but also myself worked on this topic. So these are just some examples of words that might have been borrowed in this kind of adstrate situation, where the languages might have had more or less similar prestige. And then there is the issue of superstrate, which means that there is an uneven prestige between the languages. So one language clearly has higher prestige, and it then influences the language with lower prestige in different ways, and that also can manifest itself in different areas of language. And we will come back to this possible Germanic or probable Germanic substrate in superstrate, Germanic superstrate in Finnic in a later video. And as I said, the contact between close related languages is also an important issue for us, and this is well related to problems in reconstructing the prehistoric divergence and convergence. So, for example, in the handbook by Hock and Joseph, there is this discussion of koines and deregionalization. So in contact between closely related varieties, you can have this selective simplification, which is something that in cases where, like Koine Greek, this term koinization comes from there. As many of you know, it's when we have a recorded history, it's something that can be studied quite straightforwardly, but in a prehistoric situation, reconstructed, when dealing with reconstructed languages, this is something that it's quite challenging to show that we have some kind of Koine or deregionalized variety here. And this is related to the context between close related languages is related to the issue of diffusion and how can that be distinguished from inheritance. And to give a further taster of what will come, we will also discuss the reconstructed proto-languages, the realist and formalist positions. So how real entities are our reconstructed proto-languages, and what can we really say about the social settings where those languages were spoken. But what is clear is that, or what should be clear is that we can only assume, we have to assume that languages of the prehistoric past were similar to the attested languages, and this is something that's relevant for language context as well. So we shouldn't assume something for prehistory that we don't have any kind of parallels in context between in attested language contact situations. But even though we have this sort of realist position that proto-languages are some kind of natural languages, it's true that we necessarily have a incomplete picture of the or fragmentary picture of the language itself, and thus necessarily also on the contact situations. For example, in our reconstruction of Proto-Uralic morphology and syntax, there are big gaps for knowledge, and that obviously means that it's quite difficult to show that, for example, that the syntax or something in the syntax or morphology of some early variety of Uralic has developed due to language contact. And well, final slide for this video, or final thing, but important thing, that obviously when we are dealing with historical linguistics, we cannot completely ignore the extra-linguistic issues. So obviously other branches of research like archaeology or study of ancient DNA, they bring us information that can often be quite useful, but here we have this dilemma that can we really, so how much can we let the extra knowledge of extra-linguistic situations influence our influence the assumptions that we made based on the linguistic material? And I have no answer for this. Maybe one of you has, but this is something that you have to keep in mind, that when dealing with deep prehistory thousands of years ago, as is the case, for example, with Proto-Uralic, we have to be cautious in interpreting the extra-linguistic issues. But okay, here is the reference slides. You can have much more detailed discussions of these methodological issues in these works, and I hope you will watch the rest of the videos of this course, and thank you for your attention.